Okay, let's get into this. Today we're talking about a story that really shifted how people saw Cyprus. Usually thought of as this beautiful, safe island nation.
Absolutely. Known for coastlines, low crime, very peaceful image, generally.
Exactly. But this story, based on our source material, including a YouTube transcript, it tells a really chilling story from 2019 that completely turned that perception on its head. It kicked off, actually, after a flood. Some tourists were exploring, and they made a discovery. One that didn't just uncover, a single death, but a whole series of truly horrific crimes.
Right.
And it led to identifying Cyprus's first ever serial killer.
And what's really striking looking at the sources is that contrast you mentioned. Cyprus, really low crime rates compared to the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
They'd never experienced anything like a serial killing case. It was completely unprecedented. And this event, it just exposed these, hidden vulnerabilities in their society.
So we're going to try and piece together how this all unfolded. It starts with that really grim discovery in a remote mining area near a small town called Mitsero. And we'll follow the investigation, the confession, which is pretty shocking in itself, and then look at the wider impact this had on the whole country. Why there? Why those victims? That's what we'll explore using the sources.
Okay.
So the setting is Cyprus, not the kind of place you'd expect for this level of horror. And the trigger, interestingly, according to the sources, was actually nature, some severe flooding back in April 2019.
Right, around April 14th, the sources say. After the water went down, these two tourists went exploring this old mining area near Mitsero.
Like abandoned mine, wasn't it? Known in the area.
Yeah, the sources describe it like that. Mitsero is pretty small, and this spot was quite isolated, out in nature.
And as they're sort of overlooking the mine shaft, they notice something odd. A black bag. And, human nature, right? Curiosity takes over. They go to check it out.
Exactly. And the source material says inside that bag they found a big suitcase.
Okay.
You can just picture it, can't you? That feeling turning from curiosity to, dread as they opened it. That's when the horror really started.
Yeah, the source specifically mentions seeing parts of 2 human feet sticking out, tied with rope.
Oh, wow.
Just seeing that must have been incredibly traumatic. They did the right thing. They'll call the police immediately.
And police got there fast, secured the scene, confirmed the finding. It was a woman's body in the suitcase. Initial descriptions in the source that she was slender, dark hair, maybe middle-aged, sent for autopsy, of course, the next step for ID.
And the results came back pretty quick. Identified her as Mary Rose Tiburcio, Filipino woman working as a domestic helper right there in Mitsero. But here's the first really, really unsettling detail that jumps out from the sources.
The timing.
Yeah. She'd been reported missing by her roommate 11 months before this, back in May 2018.
11 months. Wow. That's a huge gap. And the sources highlight that as a critical point, right?
Absolutely. And compounding that, her 6-year-old daughter, Sierra, was reported missing at the same time.
Oh, no.
So now the police aren't just dealing with a body sound, but a mother who's now confirmed dead, and her little girl is still missing.
And with a child that young, the awful assumption has to be she's likely also dead, even though they hadn't found her.
Right. So the focus for the investigators, according to the sources, it immediately went to Mary's ex-boyfriend, Sierra's father.
Which is standard procedure, The sources do say he'd been really worried about them both since they vanished.
Yeah. Apparently distraught when he heard about Mary's body, fearing the worst for Sierra.
Understandably.
Police brought him in, searched his place. Finding Sierra's passport there definitely raised eyebrows initially. But while they held him, the source material suggests that as they dug deeper, the evidence just dust. It wasn't connecting him to Mary's death. So they eventually let him go.
And that becomes a real turning point, doesn't it, as laid out in the sources. Initial suspect cleared, they need a new angle. So the sources show they switched focus to Mary's digital life, phone records, social media, that kind of thing.
And that digital trail, that's what led them to connect with 2 men, officers in the Cypriot National Guard, military guys.
Right. One was 30, the other 35. They seem to have been in contact with Mary before she disappeared.
So following that lead, police bring these 2 officers in for interviews. This is around April 18th, 2019.
Yes, and during those interviews, the sources describe one of them doing something totally unexpected.
He confessed.
He confessed to killing Mary.
Just like that. A military officer. That must have been absolutely stunning for the investigators.
You'd think so, but the confession, as the sources detail, It didn't stop there. It got much, much darker.
How so?
The officer, he identified himself as Nikos Metaxas, 35 years old, a captain in the National Guard, a position of authority. The sources note he was separated, had 2 young daughters himself, 7 and 6.
A captain, a father, seemingly part of the community fabric, confessing to murder. But then there was more.
Oh, yes. He then added, according to the sources, this chilling detail. Mary Rose wasn't his only victim.
Oh, God.
He claimed he'd killed 7 people in total, 5 women and 2 young children.
7.
And that single statement just instantly changed everything. It went from a single murder case to Cyprus's first ever serial killer investigation.
Hearing that, with only 1 body actually found at that stage, I mean, the investigators must have been reeling. Their whole focus must have shifted immediately.
Absolutely. Priority 1, verify his claims, find the other victims.
Did he tell them where?
Nikos gave them some initial info about a second victim, said her body was probably in the same general area where they found Mary.
Okay.
And following his directions, investigators did find a second body near that first site.
Who was it?
Identified as Arian Polonis Rosario, 28 years old, also from the Philippines, also a domestic helper who'd come to Cyprus. The sources noted her body was found naked, decomposing.
And the autopsies, did they show anything similar?
Yes, a disturbing pattern, according to the sources. Both Mary and Arian had been strangled by Nikos Metaxas during sex.
So a specific method, a modus operandi.
Exactly.
Predatory. The sources mention how he met Mary, right? An online dating app.
Yeah, Badoo. Popular in Cyprus, apparently. He used a fake name, Orestis, which, interestingly, means mountain conqueror in Greek.
Huh, okay.
They'd talked for a few months online before they agreed to meet up.
And their last contact was May 4th, 2018, right before she disappeared.
Strongly suggesting that meeting was the fatal one. It's interesting how technology played a role both in his approach and then in tracking him down.
Yeah.
The sources even mentioned he tried to swallow his phone's SIM card when the police first picked him up.
Wow. Pretty clear sign of guilt right there.
You'd think.
Okay, so 2 victims confirmed, both migrant workers. Police must have been pressing Nikos hard for the locations of the other 5.
They were. He then pointed them to a spot northeast of Mitsero, about 12 kilometers away, near a shooting range in a village called Oranta. And there, following his lead, they found the 3rd victim's body.
Identified as
Asmita Katka Bista, 30 years old, from Nepal, again, came to Cyprus for work. Her body, the sources say, was just carelessly thrown into a pit.
Thrown into a pit. And the sources highlight something about her case, don't they? About her being missed.
Right. Because she was an immigrant, apparently no family in Cyprus actively looking or filing reports, her disappearance seems to have just gone unnoticed by the authorities for a long time.
Tragic. When did they think she was killed?
Autopsy suggested sometime in the summer of 2018. And her cause of death, according to the sources, was different from the first 2. Blunt force trauma to the head, not strangulation.
Okay, so 3 victims found, all foreign workers. What next? Where did Nikos say to look?
Well, investigators started focusing based on other hints he'd dropped. He mentioned the Red Lake or Kokkinolimni.
Right, I remember reading about that in the sources. Near Mitsero, deep pond, reddish color from the mining.
That's the one. Very deep. Nikos was apparently a bit evasive sometimes, hinting but not always fully cooperating. But police decided to make a big push, search the Red Lake thoroughly. They suspected more victims were there.
A major operation then.
Huge. The sources detail the resources they threw at it: sonar, high-tech camera robots that could dive really deep, like 300 meters.
Wow. Did it pay off?
It did. April 28th, 2019, police found victim number 4 in the Red Lake, inside a suitcase weighed down with concrete.
Oh, God. Another suitcase. Who was it this time?
Livia Florentina Bunia, 36 years old, from Romania, also a domestic helper. And tragically, like Mary, she had a child who was also missing, her 8-year-old daughter, Elena Natalia Bunia.
An 8-year-old. And when had they gone missing?
Much earlier. Both reported missing back in September 2016.
2016. That's way before the others we've talked about so far.
Exactly. It suggested Livia and Elena might have been among his first victims. Maybe the first.
So the search in the Red Lake continued.
It did. And the sources report that on May 5th, 2019, they found another suitcase. Again, weighed down with concrete.
Please don't say.
Inside was the body of 8-year-old Elena Natalia Bunea, Livia's daughter.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. Mother and daughter found together like that after all that time.
Over 2.5 years, they were hidden in that lake. until this investigation finally brought them to light.
So that's 5 victims found now. Mary, Arian, Asmita, Livia, and Elena. 2 still missing based on Nikos's confession. The Red Lake was still the focus.
Yes. It was tough going bad weather, equipment problems, complex search, but they kept at it, and eventually their persistence paid off. They found a 6th victim's body in the Red Lake.
Who was the 6th?
Maricar Valtez Arquiola, 30 years old, Filipino, also came to Cyprus for work. She'd been reported missing in the spring of 2017, according to the sources.
2017, another case that had gone cold.
Exactly, until this whole thing blew open, and by this point, the pattern was just glaringly obvious from the sources.
Migrant women, mostly, and the 2 children.
Yeah. It really looked like Nikos was deliberately targeting people who might be less visible, less likely to have their disappearances investigated quickly or thoroughly.
Exploiting vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Or maybe systemic blind spots.
It seems that way. And perhaps his position as an officer gave him a false sense of security, that he could get away with it for years.
So 6 victims found. The last one missing from his confession was 6-year-old Sierra, Mary Rose's daughter. Did he say where she was?
He became difficult then, according to the sources. Seemed to be playing games, withholding information.
Why?
Who knows? Psychological games. But initially, he refused to say where Sierra was. It took 2 months after they found the 6th victim before he finally cracked.
2 months. Okay. So what happened then?
The sources say on June 12th, 2019, they took Nikos out of prison to show them where he'd put Sierra's body.
Not the Red Lake again.
No, a different spot this time. Memi Lake, near a village called Ziliados, about 12 kilometers west of Mitsero.
So another complex lake search.
Right. Similar operation to the Red Lake. And after several days searching Memi Lake, they made the final, awful discovery.
They found her.
They found a suitcase, submerged about 6 meters down. Inside, following that horrific pattern, was a child's body wrapped in cloth, tragically confirmed as 6-year-old Sierra Tiburcio.
All 7 found.
All 7 victims Nikos Metaxas confessed to killing were located and identified. The sources list them all. Mary Rose Tiburcio, Arian Polanos Rosario, Asmita Katkabista, Livia Florentina Bunea, Elena Natalia Bunea, Maricar Valtez Arquiola, and little Sierra Tiburcio. A grim end to the search phase.
Finding all 7 and knowing the killer was a respected National Guard captain. That must have just detonated across Cyprus.
Oh, completely. The source material talks about widespread public anger, huge protests erupting.
Yeah.
Because this case, it became much more than just a crime investigation. It really forced Cyprus to take a hard look at itself.
So?
Well, the sources report it sparked this massive public debate about the safety, the rights of migrant workers there, and it raised really serious questions about how the police handled missing persons reports, especially for non-Cypriots.
People felt the police had been negligent, particularly with those older cases from 2016, 2017.
Exactly. Negligent is the word used. Protests demanded accountability. Feminist groups, the sources mention, were specifically calling out the police force. Lawsuits were apparently filed against about 15 officers for negligence.
Wow. So it became a major public issue.
Huge. Media, social media, all over it. Accusations flying about, institutional problems, maybe a lack of urgency for missing foreigners compared to missing Cypriots.
And the fallout went high up.
Right to the top, according to the sources. The Minister of Justice at the time, Ioannis Nicolaou, he resigned. Took public responsibility for the, systemic failures that let this happen undetected for so long.
And the police chief.
Dismissed. Zacharias Chrysostomus. Even the president of Cyprus made a statement, acknowledged responsibility, offered condolences. It really shook the nation.
And meanwhile, Nikos Metaxas went on trial.
Yes. The case against him built on the investigation and his confession. It was overwhelming. Sources cite over 700 pieces of evidence.
Charged with 7 murders, plus rape, abduction. The list goes on.
Premeditated murder, 7 counts. Plus all those other serious charges, yeah. Obstructing justice, destroying evidence.
Did he maintain his confession in court?
Initially, the sources say he tried to fight some charges and maybe shift blame, but the evidence was just too much. His defense later brought up things like childhood trauma, antisocial personality disorder, trying to mitigate things, I suppose. A psychologist's report was mentioned.
But the court found him guilty.
Guilty on all murder counts. The cause of death for 6 was confirmed as strangulation during sex. Asmita, the blow to the head.
And the sentence?
June 24th, 2019. 7 life sentences for the premeditated murders. Basically, he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. The sources note it was the longest sentence ever given in Cyprus.
Wow. After the trial, What happened with the victims' families?
Attention turned back to them. The sources mentioned the bodies were repatriated, sent back home to the Philippines, Romania, Nepal, for proper burials, religious ceremonies.
A small measure of closure, perhaps? And in Cyprus itself.
Widespread public mourning, vigils held across the island for the 7 victims. And the sources say the case really fueled social activism, especially around the safety and rights of a large immigrant worker population there.
Calls for real change. Government action, reforms.
Definitely. To better protect migrant workers and, crucially, to ensure all missing persons reports get treated with the same seriousness, the same urgency, no matter who the person is. This whole case, starting with just 2 tourists finding a suitcase, it forced Cyprus to face a darkness it probably thought couldn't exist there. It just starkly highlighted, based on the source material, how even in places that seem safe, low crime, vulnerable people can become invisible targets, and systemic problems or biases can let horrific things go unnoticed for years.
So thinking about all this,
Yeah.
what does it mean? We've walked through this horrifying story, from that chance discovery by tourists through the investigation, Nikos Metaxas' confession, finding all 7 victims, 5 women, 2 little girls, all seeking a better life in Cyprus.
And it's clear from the sources this wasn't just about the crime itself. It became this moment of reckoning for Cyprus. It forced really tough conversations about how migrant workers are treated, their safety,
Right.
and raised those uncomfortable questions about the police response, especially when it came to missing people from marginalized communities, people maybe without strong local ties.
It's such a stark reminder, isn't it? That even in places we think of as incredibly safe, darkness can absolutely be hiding just beneath the surface. The lives of those 7 people, seemingly unconnected until tragedy linked them. It just speaks volumes about a vulnerability that existed right there, but out of sight.
Yeah, completely out of sight for the wider society and tragically for the authorities for far too long, which really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? How aware are our societies, even the ones with low crime stats, of the vulnerabilities faced by the most marginalized people living among us?
That's a heavy question.
And what responsibility do authorities anywhere really have to investigate every single missing person's case with the same energy, the same resources, the same urgency, regardless of who that person is, where they come from, or what their status is?
A truly, truly unsettling story from a place that was just not prepared for this kind of nightmare. It really does leave you thinking about those hidden stories, the potential dangers that might exist in any community, no matter how safe it looks from the outside.